Welcome back, Beans Army, to another episode of the Less is More Sports podcast. With Halloween being on Thursday, Matt and I decided to do an episode where we list the four scariest players in both college football and college basketball. Now, just a heads up, we are receiving a little bit of technical difficulties, so we're kind of doing an impromptu episode. Matt cannot hear me. I can hear Matt just fine, but we're trying to communicate the best way we can. So what we're going to do is that both of us are going to list our four players for both football and basketball all at once. So if you hear any of us talking for an extended period of time, that is why. But without further ado, we are going to get into the four scariest players of the college football season. So Matt, go.
Well, to start off today's list, I've got four players who as per usual, I try to go under the radar a little bit. So we're going to start with a big tight end, one of my favorite players to watch, Harold Fannin Jr. from the Bowling Green University. I forget what they're called, which is not in Kentucky. Bowling Green, of course, is in Ohio. This guy has 60 recs, 875 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But the averages are what's really impressive. Averaging 14.6 yards a game. And I mean, every game, even against Texas A&M, who, when they won by 6 in that game, we were kind of like disparaging them and have turned it around. Had a game where he had 8 recs for 145 yards. That's pretty good. And the guy's just big, too. I mean, a 6'4 junior, 230 pounds. We know that the MAC will often produce a good tight end, and I don't think this guy's any different. So shout out to Harold Fannin Jr. to start this list, a big tight end for Bowling Green. I can imagine opponents, especially if you're trying the linebacker position, are a little bit scared of a guy who's that big and can both block and receive on you. So that's how we're going to get things started, starting with the Bowling Green University's Harold Fannin Jr., the Bowling Green University. And then, we have a couple surprise undefeateds in football. And so one of those teams, I'm not going to talk about Indiana, nor am I going to talk about Miami, but I am going to talk about the one that's seemingly flying under the radar a bit, which is the Army school. They're 7-0 right now. Part of that is because of Bryson Daly, who's a very interesting dual threat quarterback, over 1,500 passing yards over for his career, over 1,900 rushing yards for his career, including 900 this year and 629 passing last year. That's just very hard to guard. And, 7 touchdowns passing, 629 yards. Pretty good for a guy in Army. We don't really think about Army that much when we think about football. And it's just good to have like Army and Navy both be good in college football because, that's one of the oldest rivalries. Peridot, they're both very good. And I can imagine trying to plan for that triple threat or triple running offense is giving a lot of offensive defensive coordinators, a lot of nightmares this season. And plus, the guy wears number 13, so that's spooky. Daily to 13th, it's kind of spooky, I guess. Fourth in total QBR. I mean, the guy has just been outstanding this season. Like I said, Army is 7-0. We're not really talking about them as much as Navy, but they play Air Force today. They're 1-6, and they both look, and they're probably going to improve to 8-0, which is just very impressive, even for especially for a military academy. And now we're actually going to move on to two guys who played each other last night, shockingly enough, because, I know Les is probably going to get his guy in, and I'm going to save mine for last. But I'm going to start with the team that took the L last night, but has still been one of the great stories in college football this season. The UNLV Running Rebels, led by Jalen Catalon, a defensive back, wears number 1. This year, 40 solo tackles, 4 interceptions. Oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, see, this is why everyone when they talk about the transfer portal, less, we always are like, oh my god, because somebody's got to go somewhere, and UNLV got a good one. He's a senior, 5'11", 200 pounds. I mean, 4 interceptions, 3 pass deflected, 1 forced fumble, 40 solo tackles, 11 tackles last night against Boise State. Like I said, even though they lost on the last second touchdown, still pretty impressive season for the guys up there. And who knows what we'd be talking about with UNLV if it weren't for a few, let's just say, the dark side of NIL things going on up there. But yeah, Jalen Catalon of UNLV, I'm sure, is giving a lot of quarterbacks and people who end up in his territory a lot of nightmares with those big hits that he's putting on people. And now it's time for my final one on the other side of football. We talk about Ashton Genty a lot, and we love Ashton Genty. But there was a while ago, Les mentioned when he and Ryan were doing one of the video game episodes, how much he loved the Boise State defense. And let me tell you something that you don't think about him that much, but there are some studs on that, including my last pick, for this segment, which is Ahmed Hassanain. I mean, number 91 on the defense, 7 sacks. He only has 11 total tackles, but I mean, the guy had a half sack last night and just looks like a monster up front from what I was able to see. And from Cairo, Egypt, of course, too. Love to see a little bit of international flavor on the show. So, I mean, that Boise State's defense, I mean, we got to be honest right now. Not only do they have one of the top 2 Heisman candidates, that way Travis Hunter doesn't find my Twitter account. And they're probably going to get that group of 12 playoff berth, and I can't wait to see what these guys are going to do in it with a good running game and some good defensive linemen because, it may be old school, but hey, it works. He had 3 tackles last night, a half sack, and Boise State got the win to stay on top of those settings. So those are my 4 guys, 2 offensive, 2 defensive, 2 of whom actually played each other last night, who are giving offensive and defensive coordinators and their players nightmares so far in this 2024/25 college football season. And now Les is going to give his top 4. So Les, take it away, bud.
That was a very good list, and I know Matt can't hear me, so he will not know whether I'm complimenting him or insulting him until the episode officially airs on the YouTube and the Spotify channels. But I'm officially going to get into my top 4 players that are going to be scaring opposing defenses or offenses for the rest of the season. My number 1 is going to be a player that Matt just mentioned and a player that needs no introduction, the best running back in college football, and he's on a record-setting pace even compared to past Heisman-winning running backs. But even rocking the gold locks, you have to quote Lil Wayne and say, "You can't compare me because there ain't nobody near me." And that's how the type of season that Ashton Genty is having. But all jokes aside, given how Genty stands in the backfield, it would be a complete PR disservice for Boise State to not play John Carpenter's Halloween theme song every time the offense get the ball. Broncos, make it happen. Number 2, and this may be cheating, but in light of Georgia humbling my Longhorns, I have no choice to give credit where it's due. I'll start with Jalen Walker. He was my player of the week on the social media pages, and he more than deserved it. Man, look, Kelvin Banks is a monster. He's a bad man. He hasn't allowed a sack in his Texas career until the Georgia game. And he's gone up against dominant edge rushers. And it was no accident. So in point, if you can work Banks like that, I respect you. But next is Mykel Williams. So this is still my number 2. Pairing the Georgia edge rushers here. I know he's battled injuries early in the season, but he was healthy for the Texas game, and I have to give both edge rushers a ton of credit here. When healthy, they are going to be a nightmare for opposing quarterbacks. And you know what? I'm going to quote the Freddy Krueger theme song and say 1, 2, Jalen's coming for you. 3, 4, Mikkel's at the door, and so on and so on. Moving on to number 3, a player that I have been high on this podcast, and despite other personal biases. And remember, during the hypothetical college football transfers episode, I made a statement that Dillon Gabriel could be Gabriel from Malignant in a USC offense. Well, that has carried over to Eugene, where he ultimately decided to transfer to. Him and the Ducks are undefeated, and he's putting up great numbers and even has a career high in completion percentage. After getting a big win against Ohio State, Illinois, Michigan, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Washington all remain for the Ducks' schedule. All favorable games, in my opinion. After an unimpressive start, and I say that from a team aspect, as in they weren't blowing teams out the way we had expected. Week by week, Dillon Gabriel looks to be developing better chemistry with his weapons, and that is what's really scary. And moving on to my final pick for this, one of the scariest college football players. Inner Sandman is a legendary tradition with the Virginia Tech Hokies, but the next time Antoine Powell Ryland gets a sack, they might want to add the Mr. Sandman track played in the second Halloween movie. With 11 sacks on the season, including 2 games with 4 sacks, Ryland, has given Hokie fans something to cheer about. Now that concludes my football list. Now we are going to move on to basketball. So Matt, go.
Well, Les, I'm going to start with a team we've already talked about a little bit from last year because we all know that Will Wade is a gangster, but he's still got a very good player. And even after they ran into that buzzsaw of Gonzaga, they're still going to be the favorite in the Southland Conference, partially because of the play of Christian Shoemate, a 6'6" senior from Chicago, averaged 12 points last year, basically 10 rebounds as a train rolls by my house. Uh, Basically 10 rebounds, 56% field goal percentage. This guy is going to be the player of the year in the Southland Conference because I just think he's that damn good. And McNeese State is going to do even more with a better draw than they did last year where they just drew Gonzaga. And it starts off very, very tough for them in the field of 68 showcase against San Diego State. But Christian Shoemate is going to have a massive season, number 24 for the McNeese State Cowboys. So don't say I didn't warn you about McNeese State. Moving on next, we're going to go to a team that almost made their first NCAA tournament last season, ended up losing in the championship game of their conference tournament, but a team that was incredibly fun to watch all year if you got the chance. From the High Point Panthers, I have Keza Giffa. He is a 6'2 guard. He hails from Paris, France. We like our international flavor here. Averaged 16.2 points a game, basically 3 rebounds and 3 assists a game, shooting 40%. This guy is a quick, fast guard with the ability to just distribute the ball very well. And he's just a great offense player. That High Point offense was more fun than trick or treating at the house that gives out full candy bars to watch last year. And they're going to be back, and I think they're going to be better than ever because of the play of Keza Giffa. And I mean, there are High Point. They're another team that kind of came up short on the expectations last year, but this year just brace yourself because that offense is going to be poised and ready to go. Moving on now to the excuse me alma mater of Derek Fisher, the ULAR Trojans, University of Arkansas Little Rock. There's a guy who, when he pulled his name out of the transfer portal, not only did it shock me, but it totally changed the way I viewed a conference race in the OVC, and that's KK Robinson, another guard, only 6 foot, but man, this guy is just incredible. 15.8 points per game last season, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists a game. And he shot 42% from the field. I only think that's going to get better. This guy is just going to be absolutely phenomenal. And ULA, yeah, but University of Little Rock, Arkansas, they're going to be fine next season. But this is one of those guys where he ends up in like the same breath as like Max Asmus or Lloyd Fletcher Lawyer or anybody, not Fletcher Lawyer. I'm trying to think what that guy who played for Wofford's name was, but it's escaping me at the moment. I cannot remember. But KK Robinson, he has the potential if they win that conference tournament to be one of those guys who are all like, oh yeah, I remember that guy when he beat my team at the last second with a 3 pointer because he's just that darn good with those 15.8 points per game. And the University of Arkansas Little Rock is looking very good. They made the CBI last year. I think they're going to the OVC championship and they're actually going to win it this year. They lost to Moorhead in a heartbreaker. This year, KK Robinson is going to deliver the University of Arkansas Little Rock Trojans to the NCAA promised land. And finally, the biggest conference that there is, because the biggest non-major conference that there is, while it still exists, because I don't know if this conference is going to exist in a few weeks, because you never know what the new pack is going to do, because they could add a couple of these teams. But I'm going to the American Athletic Conference, and in a conference that has Memphis and the artist formerly known as Florida Atlantic, I'm going with UAB because UAB has a very special player in Yaxel Landenborg, and this guy is just phenomenal. This guy is probably going to end up, like I said, in a conference with Memphis where there's Tyrese Hunter and God knows who else. he's probably going to be the player of the year. A 6'9" power forward, averaged basically 14 points per game last year, 10 rebounds, and 2 assists while shooting 51% from the field. He's a good defensive player. He's a really good offensive player. And UAB is just one of those teams they made the tournament with a miracle run last year. And I don't think they're going to need a miracle run this year. I just think they're going to win the conference. And that's not to knock Memphis. They're making the NCAA tournament too. But man, they are pretty dysfunctional over in Memphis right now. So, yeah, Yaxel Landenborg, he's one of the best players in the country. UAB, another team that starts off with a good test. They play Vermont, who, if you watch anything about Vermont, you know that they're always in the tournament. They run the America East Conference. So that's not a slouch game. That's a game that's going to be competitive, and that's a game that's going to be pretty good. But at the end of the day, and at the end of the season, number 3 for the UAB Blazers, Yaxel Landenborg, he's going to be a name you want to keep in the back of your head because he could deliver a lot of pain to your favorite NCAA basketball team. And those are 4 guys from the mid-major ranks who are going to give your program nightmares when March Madness rolls around. And now Les, he may have already said it, but he is going to list 4 freshmen, which was ironically the name of a vocal group in the 1960s, who are going to also give the old folks and the old coaches nightmares this year in college basketball. So take it away, Les. Let's see who you got. As if we don't already know, it's Cooper Flag 4 times.
And you know what's funny about all of that is that Matt can't hear me. And when I wanted to make this list, I wanted to talk about some people that I haven't talked enough about on this podcast. And ironically enough, I am not going to say Cooper Flag. I'm not going to talk about Dylan Harper. And the most disappointing fact about all of this for me is that Matt can't hear it. He can't be here to enjoy in the moment that I won't be talking about Cooper Flag. But but yes, I am in typical fashion. Matt named the mid majors, and I'm going to name the freshmen. And my first player I'm going to talk about, most know Toby Fournier as the 14-year-old who went viral a few years back for dunking from the dotted line in practice. But what most don't know is that's the furthest thing from her best basketball accolade. She's a 2-time Nike Hoop Summit All-Star, played in the FIBA Under-19 World Cup and averaged 16 points and 14 boards, leading Team Canada to a bronze medal. Number 10 ranked prospect in the 2024 and signed an elusive NIL deal with Leaf. Look, Cooper Flag isn't the only Duke freshman to be excited about, and Kara Lawson landed her first official gem of her Duke tenure. So the only question is, and keeping theme here, is this Toby Fournier or is this Toby from Paranormal Activity? Which is also kind of disappointing because Matt would really appreciate my horror lore here, but he can't hear any of it. It's so disappointing. But anyways, moving on to my number 2 player. The Bahamas may not have qualified for the Olympic Games in Paris, but that doesn't change the fact that that team was loaded with star talent. I mean, we're talking Buddy Hield, DeAndre Ayton, Klay Thompson, just to name a few. But leading the way in scoring was none other than 5-star freshman for Baylor, VJ Edgecombe. VJ is one of the best guards in this recruiting class and joins a recent lineage of stud Baylor combo guards, including the likes of Keontae George and Jacoby Walter. VJ is next up and could be scarier to opposing defenses than the Bahamian urban legend, the Luska. And that's what I'm so disappointed Matt couldn't hear, which low-key kind of sounds like a cheap sci-fi cult classic, Sharktopus, if you look into the urban legend, but that's neither here nor there. And I'm so disappointed because I really wanted to hear Matt's reaction on that, and I'm not going to. But anyways, moving on to my number 3 player. The name Igor is often associated in horror lore as Frankenstein's assistant, but there is no assisting the fact that BYU's Igor Demon isn't getting enough talk as the season almost starts. The 6'8" combo guard is one of the top international prospects and was a huge land for new BYU head coach Kevin Young. Demon has been rated in the 2025 NBA draft as high as the 3rd best prospect at one point, only trailing Cooper Flag and Ace Bailey. In an already loaded Big 12, an unlikely contributor could showcase one of the scariest players in the conference. And finally, for my number 4 player, The boogeyman is one of the most notorious horror lores, dating back to the old folktale adults would tell kids to keep them from wandering off in the woods. And even though John Calipari wandered off from Lexington to Fayetteville, he brings the next generation of his guard lineage with him. And that starts with Boogie Fland. Fland is one of the best combo guards in this class, and three things in life are for certain: death, taxes, and Calipari guards. And we got our first look at that last night as Arkansas put a beatdown on Kansas. That officially wraps up my list. And as always, like and subscribe to Less is More Sports on YouTube and Spotify. Be sure to follow our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and Threads. That's at Less is More Sports. Be sure to follow the side quest on TikTok. That's at BeansDad018. And I think we had a pretty good list. It's a shame me and that Matt couldn't hear me because we could have gone back and forth a little bit more, kind of thrown in some more horror lore. But as always, I hope everyone has a great Halloween. Try not to do anything too scary. And as always, stay tuned for more content coming from the Less is More Sports podcast. And that officially concludes this episode. Have a good day, everyone, and we are out.
We'll see everybody next time. Where hopefully everyone has a safe Halloween. And remember, if you get too much candy, you know where to find me.